Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. So today we're joined again by Suresh here, and Suresh has joined us before to talk about his practice, talk about business and tech law there. And Suresh, maybe start for those who may not have seen the first time you dropped by. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do and how you got into practicing law.
Okay, well, thank you, JP, for having me here. My name is Sriskandarajah, and I'm with Suresh Law, my own practice, and I focus on helping primarily entrepreneurs, especially technology startups, given my background in engineering. I started off my career as an engineer, working for Microsoft, Amazon, BlackBerry, and so on. Then from there, I transitioned into doing more project management kind of roles in those tech organizations. Then I went to do an MBA because I want to focus more on the business side of it. And then here I am, afterwards completing a law, but again focusing on my passion for technology and helping technology entrepreneurs primarily with their journey. So my practice, I started to focus on everything the startup needs from the beginning, from the incorporation, shareholder agreements, IP agreements, any privacy issues, terms of use, all of that I cover. While I was in law school, I learned primarily IP law. So IP law is trademarks, patents, and copyright. But in terms of my practice, I'm focusing more on technology law, which is a little bit broader, and a lot of technology licensing. So there are larger technology companies that continuously retain me to help with the drafting or negotiating contracts on how the technology will be licensed by others. So that's kind of like a subspecialty that I focus on, which is slightly different than the IP side. IP would be the patents and trademarks. But for that, if you're going to be doing that work, you'll become a patent agent or trademark agent after becoming a lawyer. So it's additional exam and you focus in that area. So I'm trying to stay more on the technology, broader sector.
Well, it's really interesting. Obviously, you go from engineering to business to law. I mean, you taught like three. Anyone would be happy with any one of those three. So, kind of, where did that come out organically after getting that experience? And how do you find having those, that multifaceted approach there with what your background is, and how does it help you with providing advice to someone, let's say, that's an entrepreneur, that you can converse with them about the tech stuff, you can converse with them about the business, and then you can tell them about the law? I mean, does that kind of one stop all shop there with everything?
Yeah, I mean, I never planned on doing any of this. I always wanted to be an engineer, and I thought that was going to be the end of the line. But then, life takes you in different journeys. Your interest grows, and you become like I think I'm like a multi-dimensional person who have different interests, but technology is at the core of it. So I just became interested in learning new things, and I kept evolving from there. But for my clients, they're getting a lot of, they see that value, and they see the value I can provide to them. So it's it's the ability to appreciate what it is that they're going through or what they're working on, their problems, because I can look at things, as you mentioned, from a technology point of view, because I can relate to that, because that was what I did in my previous life. So I know what they're working on, I understand what they're working on, and I can identify gaps as well. Then from a business point of view, as well, because I've worked on my own startups, I worked on exiting other people's startups. So I was a consultant. So I did a whole bunch of different things. So I can see from that angle, and whenever I provide advice, even if it's legal advice, I try to take a balanced and practical approach, because I say, okay, here's the legal things you got to do, but at the same time, I understand you may have other business priorities, and here are the things that may be on your plate. I understand. So here are the few legal things that you may need to deal with now. Others can wait for later, and that sort of a thing. And even if if I want to refer them to somebody else to do a patent or trademark application, because I have that background, I can understand and advise them on, when they should be doing that, if there is a need to even think about it at the moment. So having that multi-dimensional approach allows my clients to come to me to talk, and I can do a full assessment of what their goals are and where they're trying to go, and give them better, customized advice without looking at one silo only, right? So a lot of clients find great value in that, and that's why I'm busy doing what I do. But it's good. I'm happy to kind of take things from that multidimensional approach rather than just focusing only on the legal aspect of it.
Now your firm just celebrated its 1 year anniversary, I think a couple of weeks ago there, or even sooner.
Yeah.
Looking back now on your first year of practice and getting into this field, as we just talked about, from engineering to business now to law, what can you share with us, in terms of what you've accomplished in 1 year, what you've seen, what would you have done differently? And for those who may be looking to create their own practice, whether in tech or anywhere else in law, any advice for things you may want to change a little bit for those starting up to may not make the same mistakes? Or if everything you went according to plan, then by all means tell us that everything went according to your plans, and share us the highs and the lows of running your own practice.
I mean, I think I had a vision of where I want to go, but the details of my journey is not something that I planned in detail, and it's kind of happened, evolved by staying focused and staying productive. I think there's always a great benefit to getting as much experience as you can before going on your own. But for me, the experience more than legal, it's everything else that we spoke about, right? Because I had that broad experience and I want to kind of bring it all together and start my practice right away. And it worked out for me. But there are challenges with that, because if you worked at a firm for a few years and you had that experience, you are able to leverage a lot of resources. Whereas when you start on your own, you're kind of on your own. Yes, you can tap into mentors and peers, which I do all the time. I have partners at large firms or boutique firms and friends who went to law school who would answer the phone and help me, but it's not the same thing as having a team who you can bother on a daily basis, right? So at the initial stages, it was a bit of a struggle for me to kind of learn things on my own, but that is how things are nowadays. Even if you're in university, you're kind of learning things on your own for most part, and you're relying on your peers and professors when you have questions. So I had to be a lot more independent, but it was good in the long run. The other thing is it forces you to think creatively. Because of my unique background and coming to start my own practice, I had to look at, okay, what can be done differently right from the beginning. And it was COVID time as well. So I tried to do things differently, remotely, like all this remote practice in the legal field it's different because there's a lot of compliance that you have to think about. There's privacy. There's a lot of issues to think about that hasn't been tested properly before. But because I bring in this technology background, I was able to, right from the beginning, set up my practice differently than most firms are set up, right? Because I was born during the COVID time, right? So that was kind of a gift, a blessing in disguise, right? So I set up the practice accordingly. The other thing that happened is that, I started my journey and it was mostly leveraging my own network. And I started doing a lot of videos also on social media to share knowledge on different topics. So that eventually moved into doing more engagements like this, but also forging partnerships with the incubators, because in my previous life, I primarily worked with tech incubators and business incubators to help startups. So these same incubators were now approaching me to now advise their startups from a legal point of view. So all of a sudden, I was forming partnerships with, I now have 3 different incubators in my, if you go on my website, suresh.law, you will see DMZ, you'll see Spark Center, Mosaic Lab. And now, so that was like the first step after getting the clients, because all of these incubators allow me to connect with the startups in the ecosystem. Then from there's been technology companies such as Google and TELUS that also engage me to be on like advisory for them, but also teaching. Like with Google, it's the teaching and sharing my knowledge globally through their network. So it's like a non-traditional way of practicing law, because it's half of it is practicing, half of it is educating, right? So it was kind of an interesting mix, and I think part of that approach is more to educate the public and kind of share the knowledge so that people can also empower them to do things on their own or to better understand what their legal needs are, so that when they come to the expert or the lawyer, we can focus more on helping them with the specific need, and they have already spent some time to think about what it is that they actually need from a lawyer, instead of spending that time one-on-one for a longer period of time, right? So that's kind of what happened in the last year, the highs and lows, since you asked about it.
That's great. And let's follow up on that, because again, something that's new from last time we talked, you had this, and I think you mentioned Google there. I think it's legal insights for student entrepreneurs. So maybe you could tell us, I think there's 3 episodes on there. Maybe kind of give us an overview. Let's start from the very first one. So again, I have some students here who have some businesses that they're running, whether they're side hustles or their main hustle, and then they're looking at adding law similarly to their business there, so they can obviously advise themselves there on some of the legal implications. But tell us a bit, let's say from episode 1, what's the sort of title and kind of what you talk about in there?
Yeah. So the legal insights for student entrepreneurs was essentially a 3-part series. The first part focused on the ideation stage. When you have an idea, what are the legal things that you need to think about, whether it's a founder's agreement or any IP, how do you, what are the kind of things you want to think about to protect yourself? So that's what I focused on in that first series. And, it was hosted out of York University's chapter of Google DSC, but then it was broadcasted globally across all their network. So there were students participating from all over the world. And then obviously it's recorded so that other people can view it. And the second part is when you're actually ready to do the startup, the incorporation and organizing the company, and the various agreements that you may need, such as shareholders agreement and IP agreement. So all of those kind of things, especially with the heavy focus on the shareholders agreement, and why that can save a lot of startups from breaking up and failing due to issues in the way the partners are having or shareholders are having. So that was the second part. And the third part is, how do you grow the business? How do you raise capital? How do you restructure your company when you're trying to bring in investors? All of that kind of topics of how do you grow the company and the challenges that you may have and the legal issues you have to think about is what the third part of the series is all about.
Okay, great. So, I mean, for those who are listening here, who are the entrepreneurs, what insights there with respect to taking your idea to the market, let's say, right? You kind of just touched on that. What are some of the mistakes that, whether you're looking at it from a legal perspective or an engineering perspective or a business perspective, what are some of the mistakes that people make when they have this great idea and they're putting it out there? What do you want to avoid doing?
Yeah. The main thing is the balance. When the startup is being born, there's always a dilemma of how much is enough and where do you focus your energy. And it comes back to, there are some startups or founders who would focus on trying to have everything legal lined up for them, whether it's patents, trademarks, or shareholders agreement, everything. And on the other side, you have some individuals who try to do things on their own and do as minimal as they can, not get the right advice, and get jump started. And then when they face problems, that can shut down the whole business or cause significant nightmares. So I think the importance there is to kind of get advice right from the beginning when you're thinking of an idea. And this could be by speaking with the lawyer or speaking with, there's other resources like incubators and so on that you can get a lot of free resources from, right? And really, speaking to these resources will help you kind of flush out the idea, but also help you identify where do you need to spend how much time and money, right? Even at the early stages, because having that knowledge and having that consultation at the early stages will help you kind of map out your short-term and long-term plan of how you're going to evolve and your roadmap essentially, right? And that will have the legal, that will have the technology, that will have the business operations as part of it, right? And then another second part to all of that is protecting your IP right from the beginning. If you have an idea, people, you need to think about NDAs. You need to think about if you're hiring developers, and you're giving them equity, how does that equity going to work? Are you going to structure that as shares or stock options? What are you giving up right from the beginning, right? And even if you hire developers, and a lot of times nowadays we're hiring developers from Upwork and so on, you want to make sure that you have IP agreements set in place so that those developers, even though they got paid, they may still claim that they own the IP. So you want to make sure you transfer all that to the company so that when you're raising funds or later on, the business can operate smoothly by having the right agreements in place with the people you're paying to do the development work. So these kind of advice you can get right from the beginning, so you can kind of get an idea of what you should be thinking about as you refine your roadmap.
And then we moved on to the second part of the series there, which is then structuring your company, organizing your company. I mean, is setting it up as a corporation really the only way to go, or are there other options depending on what's being put out there? And what are some other things to for entrepreneurs to be aware of? I mean, I know you touched on just there, if you give somebody some equity, and well, what have they received, right? I mean, what are the rights and the bundles of rights that they have? And, again, as you mentioned, have you lost your trademark or something because you've signed it over and you didn't really cross the T's and dot the I's, and now everything that could be making you money can just be replicated by someone else that's on board.
Yeah. I mean, the one of the important thing is when you're organizing, oftentimes people incorporate on their own, or they incorporate, but they don't take the time to organize the company properly, to set the ground rules in the bylaws, to set up the shares accordingly, and to have most importantly, having a shareholders agreement. Because if we don't have these things in place, what may end up happening is you're issuing shares, and if there's something that goes wrong, there's no real remedy to get the shares back from a person that's not working out as part of the company, right? So you want to put in the right mechanisms in place so that if a person is not fulfilling their duties and obligations, then there could be remedies to take the shares away from them at a fair market value. If you don't have that in a shareholder agreement, you don't have that option. So a lot of times you're giving up equity, but if you're not organizing the company and you're just issuing shares, you don't have the right remedies to solve any issues when it arises, if and when it arises.
And then finally, I mean, how do you then take all that and how you strap a rocket and take it to the moon, right, with your company? How do you really get it to grow, whether it's getting more capital, whether it's getting more investors, whether it's getting your product out there? What are the last steps there in the last part of the series?
Yeah, so when you're trying to grow, there'll be different opportunities, different options available, and oftentimes it involves giving up equity. Even though you could get you could get financing without giving equity. So that's another thing people should explore. If it's short-term needs that you're having and you can finance without giving up equity, that's something you should seriously consider as well. But when you're giving up equity, whether it's to join an incubator or to bring in an investor, you want to carefully weigh in all the benefits to see what makes sense for your journey. In your journey, does it make sense to have, who do you want to have as an investor? Who do you want to, it's not just what is a process, but it's also evaluating, assessing to make sure that you're picking the right players to be the investors, or because on your journey. So that may involve, oftentimes the investors will bring and propose how they would want to take the equity, and that may require you to reorganize the company. It may give them control in terms of voting rights and so on. So you want to think through what you're really giving up and how that's giving up control of the company through the changes you're making, right? And then what value is being added in addition to the financial element that the investors are bringing in when you're growing the business.
Now, with all of these,
it has to be a strategic investor, strategic partner, strategic shareholder. So there has to be a strategy behind everything you're doing, right? So.
And from what you've seen there, and let's kind of look at the videos there. I mean, was that, you mentioned your vision before. Was this always part of that vision, is to have a lot of these I mean, whether it's this series, and I know, for example, you'd ask questions like, what are business advisory services? All sorts of different things. I mean, a very quick overview of some of these important concepts. Did that kind of come up naturally, or did you have this idea from the beginning? And how have you seen, that legal education component on your website? There are other resources, and I know you've done plenty of talks. This is the second time here, even with me. How does that kind of come together in developing your practice?
No, I think it's just your interest and your approach and what you make a priority. Because as you know, all these things take up time, right? But I have a genuine interest in sharing knowledge and educating and really helping entrepreneurs grow and thrive. And this is something I've done, before I became a lawyer. As when I was doing my MBA, working with Lori, I was teaching entrepreneurship at Lori, and so on as well. So it's kind of in my DNA. This is what I enjoy doing. So then naturally, whenever there's an opportunity, like you asked me to speak, I'll say no, I'll say yes, no matter what's on my plate, right? So the same way people propose, hey, you should be sharing this knowledge maybe through a video. So somebody just gave me the idea. I'm like, yeah, I'll love to do that. But it's taking it and running with it and seeing how it evolves, and then listening to feedback on, was it helpful? What can I do differently? It's really one thing leading to the next, but at the core of it is me having the interest in sharing the knowledge and making the time and commitment to do this. So it was not like pre-planned, but it's just goes well with balancing my practice or designing my practice to be the way I want it to be creative, really.
And do any of your clients say, hey, I was just reading about this, or I watched your video here, and then that's sort of the jumping point of a further discussion about whether they want you for business advisory services or something like that?
Both ways. So there are times when people watch and they follow up with me, or when a client engages me for a consultation, I just say, you know what, rather than paying me for all of this, here's a video I did. Why don't you go watch that and then come back so we can have a more more narrow and refined conversation, so that you can ask the right question and you're spending less time with me. So it saves them time and money as well. So I often send the videos. Sorry about that. I often send the videos to clients to watch before we have the consultations even.
Now, the other thing there, Suresh, you were talking about before was like you were essentially, your practice was born in the middle of the pandemic. So what have you learned now that you can share? I mean, who knows, again, every day is a different thing to worry about, variants and so forth. But what can you share in terms of knowing, maybe looking in the immediate future, in terms of what may stick, what may not stick, what that you found in opening and running and growing your practice, within the first year throughout a pandemic? I mean, do we need things like office space anymore? Do we need to find backup plans? Is this tech good? What about privacy? I mean, do you have any clients with concerns of meeting and discussing things over Zoom? What can you share from that experience?
I mean, we every challenges will help us evolve as well, like overcome these challenges, right? So the same way this pandemic has caused us to kind of rethink, okay, what will be we have to balance our safety in terms of meeting clients in person or meeting, but at the same time legal needs continue to exist. So then how can we rethink to make this work? And that's how lawyers like myself had to kind of rethink and provide consultations over Zoom. And yes, they, at the initial stages, or for some clients, they may feel more comfortable in person, but each time it's a personal decision that those individuals and the lawyers have to make on balancing, like, your health and safety versus meeting in person versus Zoom. It may not be as effective as meeting somebody in person and getting that comfort, but get the job done and maybe safer for you. So kind of like explaining some of that, and we've been doing it for long enough that I think people have found ways to be more productive and still getting and saving money, saving time, and being able to do a lot more things on their own. So I think that will have a lasting that may be here to stay, right? Some of these trends. But in terms of privacy, like even in terms of practice, like compliance, keeping track of when the meetings are taking place, so the format, and making sure nobody else is aware, is kind of accessing this. There's a lot of things we need to do extra as lawyers, signing documents digitally, your wills, how does that work, and how is the law adapting, any new regulations that are being created that we can leverage, all that. So it's kind of, everybody's kind of in this new ground, right? So it's not just the lawyers, but it's also the regulators that are trying to figure out how to better assist the public, but at the same time protect them, right? But in terms of working, I think, people a lot more casual, there's less expectation on how a lawyer should be dressed, or whether we can be working from home or office. I do have an office now. Again, it's a personal choice. Like, everybody's trying to get rid of the office, and I just got an office that I'm going to be a new one closer to home. So I got an office that's walking distance rather than going further away. But just for me, it's just to be able to sit and work, and not necessarily to meet clients. It's just to have that extension of the house to go and sit and work and come back home. But that's my thing, right? For everybody else, it could be different. So there's more opportunity for people to assess what works for them. And clients are also open to that idea that, lawyers are now also working in this new realm, and they can be working from home, and we can still be getting the same quality of legal services from them. But I see a big difference from 1 year ago to today, how the perception has changed so quickly from when I started to now, how people are more comfortable even in this short period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think once you get used to it and you see the pros of everything, then you just try to minimize any distractions at home. That you've done here. It's like, hey, you know what? I can always just walk over to the office and I can get some real work done. Things like that, or people just say, well, I had someone tell me that they would get in their car and drive around the block, so it looks like that they left and they came back to a meeting or to work, rather than just kind of rolling out of bed. So it kind of gives them that sense of, hey, you're at work now. But everyone has their own little tricks there with how to make things work. The other thing that we've talked quite a bit with lawyers and paralegals and other legal professionals is about, especially during a pandemic, kind of taking care of yourself, right? Taking care of your own mental health, especially running and starting a practice during a pandemic. I mean, a lot to kind of put on. How did you find that you were managing everything, and any suggestions there of being able to deal with everything, but find time for yourself, whether it's hobbies, your family, whatever it is that you need to do?
Yeah, and that's very important. It goes back to doing that inventory to see what's a priority for you, and how do you want to take, what approach do you want to take, right? And for me, it's one, like the practice of law it's very demanding as well, right? Because we are dealing with hundreds of clients' needs, and we have to take it very seriously. We have to take their problems as ours and give the best advice. We really have to internalize it, and that can have a toll on you. Because whether it's business law, technology law, real estate, or criminal law, everything is equally important to the client. So we have to do the best to kind of think in their, go in their shoes and figure out what's the best approach. But so that would have a toll on you. And then during this time, everybody has the same level of stress and anxiety in terms of being worried about their health and safety, right? So, and then you have to be there for family as well, not just for yourself. So you have to look after yourself. You have to look after, what am I comfortable with? What is my family comfortable with in terms of meeting clients or having my practice and taking care of ourselves, making time for ourselves to check up on each other. And then even with the clients, sometimes you're ending up talking about how they're feeling, how they're coping with how they're coping with everything, which is outside of the legal discussion, right? So, but I think it's all important because we take it from a human level, right? We connect at a human level and try to help each other out, and then the legal service almost becomes like a secondary thing. But we still having to do what we have to do. But you have to be compassionate and understand the needs and the situation, and why sometimes the client could be under a lot more stress and anxiety, and you just have to be more understanding and be able to cope with that when you're dealing with the situation.
Perfect. So, Suresh, thanks again for jumping in and speaking to us again. Follow up what we were talking about last time. I think more focus here on some of the stuff you're doing in terms of videos there, stuff for student entrepreneurs, and really just looking at building a practice, within your first year of doing things more innovatively there, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And it's great that you were able to come here and share some further advice there with students. So I was wondering again, I don't know if you remember what you had said the last time, but I've probably done like dozens and dozens of these since. But any final words of wisdom for the students, whether they're entrepreneurs looking to advance into developing their ideas and getting it to the market, or growing, or just students looking to get into law or getting an understanding more of law. And I know you mentioned, for example, patents and trademark agents are an option here for some of the paralegal students, but what are some final words that you can share with us?
Yeah, one, like, follow your passion, like figure out what it is that makes you excited, and then stick to that, do whatever you're happy doing, and you can change that, like things can change, and be flexible and open-minded about that. Number two, if you're interested in law, just look at, speak to more lawyers, speak to, like, visit law schools, or like speak to law students to understand what it is that they're doing, to really understand what the career is all about, and see if this is something that's of interest to you, that you would truly enjoy, because what you see on TV is not exactly what it is in real life, right? In sometimes, so the more you can kind of speak to people and do your homework, the better it'll help you assess which career path is right for you, especially in law, and then just be productive, right? So if you like, I think, just like in law school, when you're applying for law school, the LSAT, or when you're doing the bar exam, a lot of these things test you the ability to concentrate, focus on one minute detail. So it's important to kind of focus and be productive and do what you enjoy doing. So just be productive, basically. Figure out what you want to do, even whether it's law or something else, and just go for it, and be productive, and don't be afraid to reach out for help, whether it's from me or anybody else who can kind of brainstorm to see what's the right fit for you, or to give you any feedback or guidance. Don't be afraid to do that. I did that. I do that all the time. Even now, I did that from the beginning when I was considering law schools. I drove to different law schools, spoke to students and profs and lawyers. So feel free to do the same.
Perfect. So thanks once again, Suresh. Wish you all the best again as you go on to your second year and beyond there with your practice. And again, thanks for joining us, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. And hopefully we see you again tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good day.